Your birthday is coming up. Someone asks you what you're going to do to celebrate, and you respond with something that, for some reason, confuses everyone. Nothing, it's just another day. And suddenly, something curious happens. People start looking at you differently. Your friends think you're being negative. Your family thinks you're in a bad mood. And society seems to assume that if there's no cake, candles, and smiling photos, something must be wrong with you. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the fact that you don't care about your birthday says something very interesting about how your mind works? Psychologists have studied this behavior and discovered something unexpected. People who don't care about their birthday are not all the same. In fact, they usually fall into three very different psychological types. Some learned not to expect anything. Others simply have a mind that works differently. And a small group reached a conclusion that many people struggle to accept. Let's start with the first group. These are people who stopped celebrating their birthday not because they wanted to, but because they learned not to expect anything. In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman described a phenomenon called learned helplessness. When someone experiences repeated disappointment without being able to change the outcome, the brain starts doing something very interesting. It stops trying. Not because the person is weak, but because the brain is trying to protect itself. Birthdays can become an emotional experiment. As children, we expect very specific things. We expect people to remember. We expect to feel special. We expect that day to be different. But when those expectations are broken again and again, the brain starts adjusting. It learns. Neuroscience shows something even deeper. Dopamine doesn't just respond to rewards, it responds to the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. So if you expect something good and it happens, you feel a rise. However, if you're hoping for something and it doesn't come through, the emotional drop hits even harder. Eventually, the brain starts picking up on a pattern. It decides that expecting less is safer. So when someone shrugs and says, "It's just another day," it isn't always apathy. Sometimes it's a defense mechanism, layers of protection built little by little over time. But not everyone who overlooks their birthday is guarding themselves from disappointment. There's another type of person entirely. These are the ones who honestly forget the day exists, not out of sadness, not out of avoidance. Their attention is simply elsewhere. In psychology, this is often linked to something called time blindness. It tends to show up in people who are deeply absorbed in their work, ideas, or goals. When your mind is constantly engaged in building, solving, or creating, dates start to lose their weight. Days blur together. Weeks slip by unnoticed. The calendar begins to feel irrelevant. Certain events get pushed into the not urgent category, like that appointment you keep rescheduling or the endless to-do list that never quite gets done. It's not neglecting yourself, it's just a mind that's already overloaded. Then there's a third group, and this one stands out the most. These people don't forget their birthday. They don't avoid it because it hurts. They simply don't rely on it. They've seen the routine, the candles, the texts, the celebration, and came to a quiet realization they don't need it to feel okay. Psychological research supports this idea. Studies by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan suggest that people with higher well-being don't depend on external moments to validate themselves. Their sense of worth doesn't come from a date, a party, or attention from others. It comes from within. They've also stepped away from what's known as the hedonic treadmill, the cycle of constantly chasing the next exciting moment or emotional high. Because those peaks never last, so instead of running after them, some people simply step off. They don't wait for one specific day to feel meaningful. They've learned how to feel whole on an ordinary afternoon. And interestingly, that can make others uneasy because it challenges a common belief, the idea that everyone wants the same kind of attention,
the same kind of celebration. But that's not always true. Some people have already answered that question for themselves. Still, not everyone who avoids their birthday is in a healthy place. For some, there's a different story. Picture this. You're a child, maybe 8 years old. Your birthday is coming up, and you've been excited for weeks. You imagined how it would feel. Balloons, presents, people gathered just for you. But when the day finally arrives, it feels smaller than you expected. Maybe someone important didn't come. Maybe someone forgot. Maybe the energy just didn't match what you had pictured. Something shifts internally. You don't say it out loud. You don't react, but you start adjusting your expectations. The next year, you expect a little less, and then even less after that. Research shows that the brain holds on to emotional experiences tied to specific dates, not just what happened, but how it felt. That version of you doesn't disappear. There's another layer, too. Some people avoid situations that might confirm their deepest fears about themselves, so they stop celebrating, not because it doesn't matter, but because trying and being disappointed again would hurt more. So they choose not to try. And that distinction is important, because there's a difference between not needing something and secretly wanting it but not letting yourself. If your birthday feels like any other day, it's worth asking yourself honestly, is this peace or is this avoidance? Only you can answer that. But even reflecting on it already says something meaningful. Maybe we've been looking at self-love the wrong way. We've been taught that celebration equals worth, that being surrounded by people proves something about your life. But maybe that's not always what self-love looks like. Maybe sometimes it's quiet. Maybe it's simply being okay with an ordinary day. Maybe you've spent a birthday alone and still felt calm inside. If that resonates with you, nothing is wrong with you. You just don't need outside validation to feel complete. And if you came across this today, maybe it wasn't by accident, because sometimes the things we brush off are the ones trying to get our attention. And maybe this is where something new begins.